The prospect of military action against Syria has thrust the role of NATO under the spotlight. What involvement, if any, would it have in eventual strikes against the Syrian leadership? As the debate among the international community intensifies, we spoke to NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
Mr. Secretary-General, you kindly agreed to talk to Euronews at the moment when the world is deciding what to do about chemical attack near Damascus. What does NATO do or is planning to do about Syria?
First of all, let me stress that I don't foresee any further role for NATO. NATO already plays its part as a forum for consultations among allies, and we have deployed Patriot missiles to ensure effective defense and protection of the Turkish population and Turkish territory. I don't foresee a further role, but having said that, we are gravely concerned about the situation in Syria, and it's my firm belief that the chemical attacks in Syria can't go unanswered. It is necessary that the international community sends a firm message to dictators all over the world that you can't use chemical weapons without any reaction.
By doing what? How to send this signal?
Well, that's for individual nations to figure out, and as you know, there are considerations right now, but I think it's of utmost importance that the international community sends a very clear message. It is a responsibility for the international community to uphold and enforce the international ban against the use of chemical weapons.
How convinced are you that the Syrian government committed this atrocity?
I'm convinced that the Syrian government is responsible. A variety of sources point to the Syrian regime as responsible, and I don't believe the Syrian opposition has the capacity to conduct such an attack of that scale and scope. It's irrational to think that the opposition would attack their own people in areas they already control with chemical weapons. So no doubt, to my mind, the Syrian regime is responsible.
Why do you take the alleged chemical attack much more seriously than killing of civilians by bullets?
Of course, the killings we have seen in the Syrian conflict are outrageous. I mean, maybe more than 100,000 people killed. It's horrendous. But obviously, the use of chemical weapons is something very special. Chemical weapons can be used in a very limited way, but chemical weapons can easily be turned into a weapon of mass destruction. And that's why you have very, very strong restrictions in international conventions, and actually they ban the use of chemical weapons, and that's why the international community has a particular responsibility when it comes to enforcing those international conventions.
You know that Russia supports the Syrian government. It supplies it with weapons. Russia has a naval base in Syria. Whoever makes any action against Syria, aren't they confronting or in danger of confronting Russia? Are you concerned about that?
I strongly regret the division within the international community, and I think that divided international community holds a lot of responsibility when it comes to the conflict in Syria. But I think at the end of the day that also the Russians realize that much is at stake and that they wouldn't engage in a conflict. Again, I do believe that it is a responsibility for the whole of the international community to safeguard the international conventions against the use of chemical weapons.
But the situation with Russia is a bit tense at the moment. We are talking with you in Vilnius, and soon in autumn, Lithuania will take part in the NATO exercises to simulate the invasion from a foreign power, as I understand. Russia and Belarus will conduct maneuvers in the same region, and Moscow is already saying it's reminiscent of the Cold War period. Don't you agree?
No, I think everybody should calm down. It's a quite natural thing that militaries do exercise. I mean, that's necessary. We do it, the Russians do it. I don't think the problem is the exercise as such. It's a problem if there's no transparency. And that's why we have provided full transparency. We have invited the Russians to learn more about our exercise. We have nothing to hide. And we encourage Russia to brief us on their exercise as well.
The United States have offered what is considered concessions to Russians in terms of missile shield, disarmament. What's your reaction to their reaction, to Russia's reaction for this offers?
Yeah, but first of all, let me stress that we have decided to build a NATO missile defense because we want effective protection of our populations against missile attacks. And we know that more than 30 countries in the world have or are acquiring missile technologies. Some of them do have a range sufficient to hit targets in Europe, and we want to protect our populations, and that's why we will build a NATO system. We have invited Russia to cooperate. So far, they haven't responded positively. Recently, the Americans changed slightly their missile defense approach, but it won't change the fact that by 2018 there will be full coverage of the NATO missile defense system.
That's all we have time for. Mr. Rasmussen, thank you very much for your interview, for your interview.
You're welcome.
Thank you.